Today we're going to be talking about a framework I've developed and been working on for some time called Communications and Learning for DevOps. And why is this important? Well, there's been a lot of talk about the death of instructional systems design and how learning engineers are inching towards a spotlight, and how if instructional design is dead, what fills the void, and oh, is instructional design dead, and all of these different things talking about instructional design being a dying art, and is it worth it? Is e-learning dead? So, and then there's also been a lot of talks about, oh no, there's a lot of automation and robots are going to replace all of our jobs. All sorts of different fears about how AI and artificial intelligence and all of these new technologies are going to do so much to change drastically what it means to be a worker, and especially a knowledge worker, in the world economy of tomorrow. And along all of the fear and naysaying, there is some truth to some of the concerns. Each and every one of the previous industrial revolutions had massive impacts all over the world. However, one of the things that is interesting is, for example, the second industrial revolution ended in the 1950s technically. However, 17% of the world's population today, that's 1.3 billion people, don't have access to electricity. And so there's 2 points to this. One, if we don't embrace the technology or have access to the technology that comes with an industrial revolution, we're not able to benefit from the rewards, and we're certainly not able to compete with those that do. And so in the fourth industrial revolution, starting around 2010 and carrying on into today, the power that needs to be embraced is that of automation. You know, what is that the fourth industrial revolution? The fourth industrial revolution is a way of describing the blurring of boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. And so whenever you hear people talk about the fourth industrial revolution and how a lot of the automation techniques that we're going to be talking about today and digital transformation, that's what these are symptoms of this massive blurring of boundaries between these physical, digital, and biological worlds. And so we have been using traditional instructional system design methods. And here I mentioned the Dick and Carey model, which to me is very reminiscent of a classical systems engineering functional flow block diagram. And that is fine and it works. However, and this is an example of a goal analysis with the prerequisite skills analysis accompanying it that I did as part of my master's degree at the University of South Alabama. And that functional flow block diagram, you could see that the Dick and Carey model's goal analysis and task analysis was clearly inspired by classical systems engineering. An FFBD is something that classical systems engineers use in order to complete their tasks. And so that is part and parcel of the previous industrial revolution. And you could see that here, for instance, that traditional methods work and do work, but how many of you have been able to do a formal front-end analysis, a tried and true formal front-end analysis, and spend 12% of your project budget, or even 9% in the case of level 3 or the e-learning, on analysis in order to determine what the actual needs are for your project and make sure that you're meeting them. And that's why my colleagues, I'm sure you already know, that these methods that we've used in the past are not able to keep up. I don't know anyone except within an isolated community such as working for the federal government that is willing to take the expense of investing in such a massive upfront cost for doing that front-end analysis I don't know of anyone else that's able to do that. And furthermore, even those people are not doing it the tried and true ways. We're adapting, and we're doing our very best to keep up with the pace. Hence, models like Michael Allen's successive approximation model, or SAM, and the agile environment that we were trying to become a part of in order to keep pace. And in my own experience, technical writing and training teams just are not able to keep up. There's shifting schedules for the production line. There's crushing technical debt. We're using software and tools and methodologies that are decades old. And then, of course, the changing source documents. How many of you are expected to deliver at the same time as at the same time that the system is actually being delivered? So why traditional methods don't work today? This is from a presentation made by Abby at the Lean and Six Sigma conference in 2021. And he's talking about the DMAIC process, which is very similar, again, to the old school analysis, design, development, implementation, and control, or ATD method that instructional design was based upon. Let's let them speak about why these methods aren't working anymore.
The key challenges, and Paul mentioned and touched on some of these, is that the time to results are usually slow, the cost is high, it's really hard to take a look at all of your transactions just because of the volume of data. Sometimes it requires heavy technical skill sets for analysis that not all users may have, and then the business cases are created with a high number of assumptions, and then the monitoring is manual, time-consuming, and retroactive.
So elite performers today are 2,604 times faster in recovering from incidents. They're deploying code 46 times more frequently. They're 1.53 times more likely to meet or exceed business goals. They're 1.8 times more likely to recommend their team to others, and they're also more likely to keep their best performers, their best people on the team. And if people are embracing automation and doing so well responding to DevOps, what that does is that for our training and learning performance professionals, that is why we can't keep up. That's why if Amazon's updating its website 20,000 plus times a day, there's no training documentation in the world that's manually intensive that could ever keep up with that. So if we continue to use manually intensive methods such as slide-based presentations that are dependent upon our training to drop our didactic knowledge bombs at our audience, we're not going to be able to keep up. Our materials will be outdated before they're even finished. And so, my shop of 9 people, or even an e-learning shop of 1, are already able to do so much, and we're at the maximum capacity, and we're constantly improving. Well, even if we, by ourselves, as learning and as talent development professionals, even if we, by ourselves, are doing the very best that we can, it's an illusion. As Goldratt asserts, in any flow of work, there's only one direction of flow, but there's one and only one bottleneck. And any improvement not made at the bottleneck is an illusion. Let's say that again. Making improvements at a non-bottleneck doesn't make the system one bit more productive. The time and money saved is an illusion. It doesn't matter how fast you get at using Articulate Storyline if the materials that you're developing are automatically out of date before you finish them. So it doesn't matter what name you call our profession. Whatever the human learning performance role is, be it talent development professional, instructional systems designer, instructional designer, learning experience designer, learning engineer, if we improve how fast we're able to get work done, our customers, and deliver that out to the customers, improving delivery to the customers will only leave our team starved for work. People will be wondering what value we provide because it seems like all we're doing is sitting around with all of our spare time. So just improving our output isn't going to do any good. furthermore, what's happening today for sure is that the suppliers are improving their output, right? They're 2,604 times faster. And whenever they're improving their output in such a way, they're giving us this overwhelming information tsunami that we're expected not only to keep pace with, but be in step with as we deliver our solutions and keep people trained and keep people apace of the latest and greatest technologies and changes in systems. However, given that we're not able to process that, we're the bottleneck. And so work is piling up to unmanageable levels. So whether it doesn't matter what you call us, if our inputs, processes, and outputs are the same, if we're not improving our how we're handling and being in step with what the suppliers are doing, and we're not allowing our customers to also keep pace with that, any improvement that we make is an illusion. So the classical systems approaches that instructional systems design was based upon could be thought of as the V model in systems engineering, where you go through the development and validation for that entire process. And concept development. Okay, well, let me validate that, and here's the requirements engineering. Let me do the test and evaluation, system architecture, system integration, and then of course in the middle that ties the two together is a system design and development. And so, if you don't believe me that instructional system design, as we know it, and even if you're using the systems approach, the successive approximation model, or the classical systems approach to training, and how that's based off the classical systems engineering. Don't believe me. Believe Dr. K. Branson.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how did you arrive to setting up the 5 stages? What was the idea behind them?
Oh, the 5 phases are the basically derived from the systems engineering regulation.
Okay.
It's a standard approach in systems engineering to have those 5 phases used in everything from the auto industry to satellite building to whatever.
Okay.
So that was 40 years ago, plus. So what are modern classical systems engineers using? Well, they're using frameworks that support enterprise architecture and model-based systems engineering. They're using the unified modeling language or the systems modeling language in order to map out a model of the system that's called a source of truth, and that it's the second that one party updates that source of truth, all of the other parties that are affected by it are automatically updated with that information. And so this leads me to DevOps, which to me is the perfect synthesis of all of these converging technologies that we've been talking about. It's the manifestation of Industry 4.0, specifically for, in this particular instance, the frustrations that software development, or dev, and IT operations, or ops, teams were facing as they tried to get critical products and services to the market. So Donovan Brown, a Microsoft Partner Program Manager, says, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And he says that out of the process, out of the products, out of the people, the hardest one to get to provide value is the people. He says you need to underline that, bold that, highlight it in red, because it's the hardest one. One of the reasons why, as we know as human learning and performance professionals or talent development professionals, is that we're here, not only cultural issues, but humans take time. We're not machines. We take time to learn new things, and how we learn things is very important. So whenever people talk about DevOps, they talk about the 3 ways of DevOps, and I highly recommend reading the Phoenix Project, where They started restoring sanity whenever they figured out what their constraint was, what that choke point was. Then you got to protect it. Make sure that the time on the constraint was never wasted, and make sure that you do everything to make sure that work flows through it. So there's 3 ways of DevOps. The first way is flow, what Peter Senge calls a profound appreciation of the system, where you're able to take raw inputs all the way through all the various work centers to customer or silos, all the way to customer operations. The second way is feedback, where through dialogos, the free exchange of ideas, you're able to take what the customer says all the way back through all those various work centers, each work center giving feedback to the previous one, all the way back to those raw inputs. And that, if you're able to do that and do that successfully, where people are safe and where people feel psychologically and physically safe, you're able to create a culture of continuous learning and experimentation. So I took this course, I quoted it previously, by Richard Schroeder on Pluralsight, and he has this wonderful graphic here showing this flow between the workflow, what he calls the DevOps tool chain, between planning and issue tracking and source control, build test with the continuous integration and continuous deployment, or CI/CD, configuration management, the cloud platforms, and then the monitoring and logging of that system. And that's essentially a value stream. And he says straight up that the number one thing that aids that value stream flow are communication and knowledge sharing. Well, talent development professionals, that's one of our primary roles. Communications professionals. And so that was, whenever I saw this graphic, a light bulb went off in my head, and I realized that we must become partners with the value stream and not be overcome by those waves of technology. We must ride these same waves. And so Andrew Schaefer says, you're either a learning organization or you're losing to someone who is. The key aspects that enable DevOps across their value stream are knowledge, sharing, and communication. Another thing that Emily Freeman says in her book, DevOps for Dummies, is remember to keep calms. And CALM stands for culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing. You want to make sure you put your people and your process at the front, that you embrace automation. Anytime there's a repeatable activity, you automate it. As much as, to quote Donovan Brown, you rub some DevOps on it. You apply Lean and Six Sigma principles. You apply the Lean principles to ensure that there's no waste. You apply the Six Sigma principles to ensure that there's a high standard of quality. And that leads us to the metrics. You measure extensively and you use that data to improve. And then, of course, you're sharing continuously. And because you're in an environment of trust, you're able to share that knowledge freely without fear. And so the value stream that we mentioned earlier, a simple SIPOC diagram, are suppliers, inputs, processes, outputs, and customers. If we map out the entirety of the value stream, we could talk about, value stream mapping. By the way, I highly recommend reading Value Stream Mapping by Karen Martin. Fascinating stuff. However, if we don't see our process in the big picture and how we can embrace this technology and these tools in order to ride that wave, we're going to be value detractors instead of value adders. And so we can map out the value stream between Work Center 1 and Work Center 2 pretty easily. Where it gets tricky is whenever we say, oh, the Work Center 2 isn't just a singular work center. That's the Navy acquisition program. And they have their own technical documentation and training teams. They also have their own admirals running that, their own admirals and SESs running that whole program. Then they have their own contract management and legal teams. Then there's a major military contractor, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and they have their own teams that have their own value streams. And then, of course, there's the actual customer, who in this case are thousands of people, the Fifth Fleet, their own leadership, their own contract management, their own legal, their own technical documentation, their own training teams. And so if we're not able to allow work to flow through this value stream because of proprietary information or because of some specific proprietary API, or because we're still using PowerPoint to capture technical training and the systems engineer just updated the training material and I only know about it because I just overheard it at the water cooler, and now I've got 300 plus slides that I've got to update overnight in order to deliver that on time to the customer. Those constraints can be nefariously stealthy as they approach across the system. It's very difficult to track exactly where that waste is, exactly how much we're losing because we're not embracing automation across the value stream and the entire value stream, not just within your organization, but across your customers, across your suppliers, both as an individual team and as an organization. So this has some implications for what communications professionals will do in a DevOps environment. I define human communications professionals as those who capture and disseminate the single source of truth across the value stream. Where one party updates the source of truth, all of the other parties are notified. And these are a few of the human communications professionals, everything from executive leadership all the way to software multimedia developers as they're commenting their code. That should be captured and disseminated across the value stream in a way that's easy to understand for all of the stakeholders involved. And learning professionals, we're not going to be those in the future who are, I've used PowerPoint here. We're not going to be people in the future dropping didactic knowledge bombs on our audience. Rather, we're going to be those who support and certify accomplishment-based job competency using evidence-based methods. Rather, we're going to make sure that people know how to do their jobs. And so again, you can see some overlap here. But the primary focus on a learning professional is not whether you deliver the knowledge. For telling it, to quote a popular ATD book, telling ain't training. Rather, you're there to certify performance. This has vast implications for what our jobs as learning professionals, as educators, as trainers and teachers will look like whenever we're not touching the PowerPoints, because we're not making slide-based presentations. We walk into a room and we say, all right, everyone, don your goggles. It's time to go through this activity so that you can know how to do your job. And they do the job in a high-fidelity manner as possible. It used to be that in e-learning, I was told many times that e-learning couldn't assess psychomotor skills. That was less than 10 years ago that I was told that. Today, VR can and does. So, communications professionals, those who capture and disseminate the single source of truth. Learning professionals, certified job competency throughout the value stream. And these are the disciplines affected, or some of the disciplines affected. Any one of these parties can update that source of truth. Any one of these parties can certify job competency. And our job as talent development professionals and learning performance professionals is to ensure that people know how to do their jobs, and that includes certifying job competency. So obviously I'm talking about value streams across massive organizations consisting of thousands and thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people. You can't change all of that overnight. You can't change even one of those organizations, the technical training or the technical documentation team. You can't change those overnight. So you start with one process, and then you improve it, working together with your stakeholders. And of course, I've created my own continuous improvement cycle based off of the Plan, Do, Study, Act, or define, measure, analyze, improve, control, DMAIC cycles, and I call it CALDO, where first you create your intent, you assess your workflows, you launch feedback loops, and the focus there is make sure that there's a way to capture that and communicate that across the value stream. And with that, you're creating a culture of you're developing a culture of experimentation where people feel safe and are encouraged to be and provided the means with which to be resilient. You conduct an experiment where people's alternative ideas are tested and they're not rejected offhand, but rather embraced and given the opportunity to shine. You convert those local discoveries that people have into global improvements. As Karen Martin states, a performance improvement in one area can have a massive impact across 75% of the organization. So then you observe and you learn. You observe for what you're wanting to make sure that you're getting is intent-based leadership across the board. You're certifying technical competence in the workflow or workflows of interest, and that everyone in the organization understands what the organization is trying to achieve. You celebrate successes, and you don't celebrate failures. You celebrate the results gleaned from the failures and enable people to fail, enable people to be able to fail. And then you don't waste the data that you just paid for. You don't fire the person just because they made a mistake, an honest one. So much to say about that. And so this is not obviously a one and done proprietary software. Rather, this is CALDO encourages a loosely coupled architecture. Whatever the solution is, work within your own tools. Again, as Donovan Brown says, rub some DevOps on it. And you don't wait for permission is another thing that Donovan Brown says often. You don't wait for permission to do your job, to add value. You have a bias towards action, right? So just start with one process and use this framework in order to assess your own workflows, launch your own feedback loops, develop a culture of experimentation, and then observing and learning as you go. As you find that one process with these concepts and principles in mind, I think that you'll be able to build upon that and start a continuous improvement cycle, a cycle of continuous improvement. So obviously, there is a maturity process that has to happen here, and we're really just scratching the surface of phase one, which is awareness. The second is process mapping, or what Karen Martin calls metrics-based process mapping, where you know exactly what you're doing and how long it takes in order to get that done. If you can't describe the steps in your process, you don't know what you're doing. Then there's value stream mapping, where you know from supplier all the way to customer. You know your inputs, your processes, and your outputs. And you're able to describe that across not only your, ideally starting with your work center, but that would be metrics-based process mapping, but across the organization, and even better, partnering across the work silos, partnering across your entire organization. Notice that it's not until you have organizational partners that your suppliers, whatever the organization is, its suppliers and its customers, it's not until they're working together in this method that you have true organizational agility. And then from there, if everyone in the nation and their international partners, their allies, are working together, you achieve societal agility. And so a CALDO mature organization, what would that look like? Well, anytime a government writes a law, across the board, everyone along that source of truth is automatically updated with that information. Their industry regulations are updated. Societal needs are documented or communicated so that whenever the law is written, it knows what the impact should be on society, and it's based off of logical, clear data and in alignment with market demands. The contract requirements, whenever they're written on a project, they're in alignment and in step with all of these regulations and the needs and the demands of the market. And you as an organization are able to conduct your operations knowing that you're delivering on time with your customers. You know what your customers are thinking. You know what your suppliers are doing and what their needs are. And you're able to meet their needs as they're able to meet yours. And across the board, your own organization is operating with all of that value stream and all of the different people across that value stream automatically improving their communications and their learning, which again is certifying job competency across that value stream in a way that allows you to shift from being the cowardly lion, oh no, AI is going to take our jobs. No, let AI be part of that improvement process. And be courageous, because we can go from wondering whether or not instructional design is dead to being incredibly, obviously valuable business partners, people that are heroic to the organization, people that would not be able to, people that appreciate what we do because they would not be able to do their jobs without us. And in the age of automation, people are begging for human learning and performance professionals, talent development professionals. There has never been a better time in the history of our profession to be a human learning and performance professional. So let's ride the wave. Let's go with the flow. Let's not fight the waves of these information tsunamis. Let's work together with them and embrace those. And I think that the CALDO framework can do that. If you'd like to learn more about the CALDO framework, please go to www.caldo.academy and sign up for updates. If you do, a copy of this PowerPoint in PDF form and handout with a list of resources will be provided. Please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your conference.